Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone. This is the webinar on transit, traffic, and trees, an information session on the Ontario Line construction impacts, what we know about. And I'm Councillor Paula Fletcher. I'm very happy to have you all join us here tonight for this info session. We'll just let everybody have a moment to get on. We have 100 or more people who are interested in this info. This is live and it is being recorded. Thanks for joining, everybody. We're just giving time for everybody to get on to the webinar on transit, traffic, and trees. Thank you for joining tonight. You might see me drinking out of that wine glass, but it's water. Up at the East York Civic Center, there's no regular glasses. For some reason, there's just wine glasses. So you'll have to bear with me while I drink my water. Thanks for your patience, everybody, while we're just waiting for everybody to get logged on here tonight. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm City Councillor Paula Fletcher, and thank you very much for joining this webinar tonight. Transit, Traffic, and Trees, Ontario Line Construction Impacts. It's an information session. And I would just like to start with the land acknowledgement, of course, particularly today. Executive Committee has ratified the Reconciliation Action Plan of the City of Toronto. It's been a long time coming through our Indigenous Affairs Committee that we have at the city and our Indigenous Affairs Office. So working with the Indigenous community, and if you'd like to get a copy of that, please look up the Executive Committee or write to my office and I'll get it to you. We acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Just show you the agenda for tonight. A lot of great guests here for you. I'll give a little opener, and then we have great staff here with us tonight from Parks, Forestry, Recreation, and the Transit Expansion Office, and Barbara Gray, who is the General Manager, Transportation Services. So unfortunately, Janie Romoff, who's the General Manager of PF&R, came down at the last minute with something, so she's not able to be here, but I'd like to welcome Kim Stratton. She's the Director of Urban Forestry. Tina Fernandez, she's the manager in the transit unit for Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. And Mark Ventresca is a project manager for Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. Derek Toigo is the executive director, Transit Expansion Office. Barbara Gray, as I mentioned, is our general manager, Transportation Services. And she's here tonight with Navi Tathkar. He's the manager, Transit Infrastructure Projects in Transportation Services. Saikat Basek, Senior Engineer, Transportation Services. And a big shout out to Saikat because he was one of the main people that designed and worked on the Danforth cycle track and fixed up all the little things that we needed to when they went wrong. And particularly Jones and Danforth. Thank you, Cycat. And Terry Francoeur, who's the Senior Project Manager, Transportation Services. We also have two others, Nasli Dagani, who is with Transport Services, and Sheikh LM. Thank you for being here tonight. So I'm just going to start tonight with a few little remarks, letting you know that how did we get here? And this is simply an information session. It is one I'm going to say that it's a don't shoot the messenger system. It's the Ontario line is not a City of Toronto project. It is an Ontario government Metrolinx project, which you probably all know. But during this process, Metrolinx has made requests and applications to the city in order to build the Ontario line, and it's time you knew what those were. So just a quick recap. You probably all remember that in 2018, the newly elected provincial government canceled what was the downtown relief line, or the TTC relief line. It was going down Pape and it went underground to from Pape Station all the way to East Harbour and then downtown under the river. And they announced they're going to build the Ontario line instead. And there would be an above ground section of that from the Don River to Gerrard Street. And this is the section that we're going to be looking at tonight, and all of the various transportation and parks impacts that we know of through the applications and the requests that Metrolinx is making. You all know that many residents and your elected representatives have called for the Ontario line for this section to run underground instead of above ground. The City Council has said, please put it underground, just because of the amount of impact that we're anticipating that it will have, including just running 6 tracks above ground through that 1.22 kilometer section. However, Metrolinx so far has maintained the above ground alignment. In the face of all of the advocacy, they've said they're still going above ground and they're preparing it. You all know, or you might not know, that in 2020, the Ontario government passed a Building Transit Faster Act, and it actually gives Metrolinx the power to force municipalities and residents to permit access, remove obstructions, speed up expropriation if they need to for the Ontario line. So this is something that's important to know, that even if we say, no, you can't have that permit, they'll say, well, we think we need it and we're going to do it. So if we can have a working relationship to look at what the best mitigation is with your good advice, that's probably the best way forward, assuming it remains above ground. So tonight you're going to see what the Metrolinx has said are their construction requirements, and they've sent these to the city for what's called their early works construction of the above ground line. We know that's running from East Harbour to Gerrard. And I feel like what I know, you know, and that's why I thought it's important to have this tonight. I have learned about all of these applications. I've heard what all the necessary things are that they're asking for. And I really feel that I need to bring you all into the loop, that this is what the construction would look like. These are the requests. And so far, they are not using the Better Transit Faster Act and saying we're just doing X or Y. They're actually sending in requests to the city regarding construction requirements. And I'd really like you to see these. I think your feedback on a number of these things will be very helpful as the staff at the city receives these requests and makes suggestions to Metrolinx about how they might mitigate this a bit more. But having said that, it is truly not the best case scenario, but this is what we're doing here tonight. So I think lastly, it's a don't shoot the messenger night, because this project is not a city project that's being put forward by city staff. They're responding to what Metrolinx has given. And Metrolinx at some point will have to come forward to the community and say, here's the final plan. So just quick refresher on the Ontario line above ground corridor. You know that they've proposed that section between Gerrard and the Don River, and you can see, East Harbour and Gerrard. You can see the portals here coming along. And there are many community concerns about impacts on the recreation center, our local parks, our bridges, road construction, our businesses, so many different things. And when it was first brought forward, there were going to be 4 GO tracks. And then on each side, the Ontario line would run on each side. But since that time, there has been a change. And they have made, this is a schematic drawing for you, where all 4 GO line trains will be on what I'll call the east side of the track, and the 2 Ontario line trains will be over on the west side, running in this configuration. A lot as well, the track bed has to be raised 5 feet all along the joint corridor for the 2 kilometers. When we say joint corridor, that's because it's GO train and Ontario line in the same corridor. And that means there will be additional construction impacts along this corridor. So at the city's request, Metrolinx is seeking input to foster design excellence in the retaining wall and noise barriers that will be there. And there is a working group and plans for design competition, which will include a public presentation. And the Lakeshore East Community Liaison Committee, which is started on the GO line side, but is now in the joint corridor, has been leading this work. And I think probably ready in the next couple of weeks to launch this, and we'll let you know all about that. And that is the first poll question. I just want to run a little poll with you before we get started, so everybody knows who is here. And it is just finding out where you live. Whether you live west of the rail corridor, south of Dundas, east of the rail corridor, south of Dundas, west of the rail corridor, Dundas to Gerrard, east of the rail corridor, Dundas to Gerrard, or maybe somewhere else in Ward 14, or maybe you live somewhere outside of our ward. And if you do, welcome to our fantastic ward and all our fantastic residents. Just let you finish that in a second, find out who's here. And end that shortly, thank you. Pretty well spread out, although the winner is east of the rail corridor, south of Dundas with 26%, west of the rail corridor, Dundas to Gerrard 20, west of the rail corridor, south of Dundas, and then elsewhere in Ward 14, 21%, east of the rail corridor. You can see that. So thank you very much. It's a really great coverage of people from all sections around that Ontario line. And with that, I'm just going to ask another question. No, I'm not. I'm just going to go to transportation services. And I believe that CICAT is going to give us the presentation.
Thanks, Councillor.
I will just let you all know, you can ask your questions. We're doing that in the Q&A, and we'll answer those live, answer them writing, or every question that's asked or comment in particular will all be turned over to either Transportation Division at the city for their to be able to look at and review, Mr. Toygo from Transit Expansion Office, or the Parks, Forestry and Recreation rep. So there you go. Take it away, CICAT. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor, and thanks for your nice words, kind words about the Danforth work, which was a team effort for all of us, I believe. So with that, let me share my screen. Do you guys see my presentation in full screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. And my apologies, I'm going to be tilted a little bit towards right because that's where my second screen is for the full screen presentation. But I promise I'm going to come back directly looking at you after my presentation. Good evening, everyone. This is Saikat Basak from Transportation Services. And on behalf of Transportation Services, we are making a presentation on Metrolinx Ontario Line early works construction for the Lakeshore East Joint Corridor, as Councillor mentioned, between Eastern Avenue and Pape Avenue. And we would be concentrating on the impacts on city streets and community and mitigation to that impacts. Let's go into the presentation overview. We'll talk about the background of this meeting, what is the driver from the council, city council motion, and we'll then go into the Metrolinx Ontario Line early works construction proposal, and then going into the construction requirements from Metrolinx for early works. We'll explain our plan from transportation services to manage the early works construction impact, what we would request to Metrolinx in terms of mitigate the construction impacts, and then we'll wrap up the presentation with next steps. So let's look into what is why we are here. As council directed us, that's because council directed us to consult you. Earlier this month, City Council adopted a motion that was brought by Councillor Fletcher, and that requested transportation services to attend a public meeting held by Councillor, and that would be regarding the impacts on the city's right-of-way due to the construction of the above ground portion of the Ontario line. And they also directed us to complete the consultation and report to the council before transportation services issue any permits within the right-of-way related to this project. So with the above background in mind, the objective of our meeting would be to inform you on Metrolinx's construction proposal for early works, how we plan to manage on behalf of transportation services the construction impacts, obtain your feedback, and then ultimately work with Metrolinx to resolve potential transportation related issues during the construction. Now, as Councillor has already provided you a background, the Metrolinx Ontario Line early works construction would essentially entail two major work within the rail corridor and works for the bridges. So in this first slide here, I'm providing you an overview of the works within the rail corridor. And the graphic here, let me run you through this graphic. You can see the north is to the top right corner, and Eastern Avenue is the bottom left here, and then Queen, Dundas, and the north-south streets, Carlo and Logan, are shown here. And as Councillor was explaining, Metrolinx, as part of this early works, see these green lines there? Those are basically the GO tracks, and Metrolinx planning to realign the tracks, expanding the GO tracks, and at the same time within the rail corridor, Metrolinx is making space to add the Ontario lines, which are shown in pink here within the rail corridor. So all of these would be part of the early works construction, and at the same time, as you may have heard from the other consultation meetings, that Metrolinx are going to be constructing the retaining walls, noise barriers, as well as the in-corridor drainage as part of these early works. And the general timeline of these works would be between October this year to December 2025. And an overview of the impact of these work within the right-of-way would be that the Metrolinx would require truck access points from the city streets next to the bridges that I'm going to explain to you in the next slide, connecting to the rail corridor. So let's go to the Breezeworks, as I just mentioned. So similar to the previous graphic, the scope here would be from Metrolinx. All those blue rectangles here at Eastern, Queen, Dundas, and Logan, those would be the GO bridges that Metrolinx need to reconstruct as part of the early works. And the yellow rectangles that are at Eastern Avenue, Dundas, and Logan, those would be the new Ontario Line bridges that would be constructed as part of the early works, or in case of the Eastern Avenue, that would be delivered as part of the East Harbor Transit Hub works. And generally the timeline of this work would be, again, starting from October 2022 to June 2025. And the impact of these are pretty obvious. Lane closure on city streets that would be required to reconstruct these bridges at Eastern, Queen, Dundas, and Logan Avenue. There are also other parts that would be happening after the early works are completed. that include the Riverside or Leslieville station and the Ontario line bridges over there. And also at Gerrard station, Metrolinx would construct the Ontario line bridge as well as the station later on. So with that overview in mind, let's dig into the details of the impacts for the Breezeworks first, and then we'll discuss about the impacts for the rail corridor works. So as I mentioned, there are 4 bridges there, and in this slide, I'm talking about the 2 bridges first, and the next slide we'll talk the other 2. To the left of our screen here, we are these are the high-level or categories for the impacts: work duration, impacts to traffic lanes, pedestrian connectivity, cyclist connectivity, transit connectivity, and impacts to business and property access. So starting with the Eastern Avenue Bridge, the bridge construction would start in October, and current Metrolinx proposal is to finish it by June 2025. In terms of impact to traffic lanes, they would maintain 1 eastbound and 1 westbound lane during the entire period of construction. There would be multiple short-term 2 to 3 days full road closures that would be required for the bridge deck replacement. And these works are currently proposed for weekends, but this could be placed for the early part of the week to minimize disruption to the community when as most of the community events and the businesses are in full, I would say, operation during the weekends. In terms of pedestrian connectivity, covered and protected pedestrian walkways would be maintained on both sides of the during the entire construction. As you know, there are no dedicated bike lanes on Eastern Avenue, so cyclists would continue to share the available traffic lanes with motorists during the construction. There is no transit service along Eastern Avenue, and all the businesses and property accesses would be maintained. The next one is the Queen Street Bridge, which I believe would be of interest to many of you. The construction is starting in January 2023 to March 2025, and Metrolinx plans to maintain at least 1 eastbound and 1 westbound travel lane during the entire portion of the construction. Although during some periods, there will be 2 eastbound and 1 westbound lane, and vice versa would be maintained. And similar to the Eastern Avenue bridge construction, there would be multiple short-term 2 to 3 days full road closures for bridge deck replacement. And again, these closures are currently proposed during the weekends, but this could be moved to during Monday and Tuesday when the business impacts would be less, and also community event impacts would be less. In terms of the pedestrian connectivity, there would be alternating sidewalk closures during the bridge supports demolition for up to 3 months. That basically means that when the bridge support on the north side is being constructed or demolished, the sidewalk on the south side would be opened. And similarly, when the construction or demolition on the south side is happening, the sidewalk on the north side would be opened. But there would be controlled access points on both sides of the bridge access, as you know, at Bolton Avenue and Empire Avenue. Through the pedestrian crossovers, pedestrians would be able to go to the alternate sidewalk. And during the other part of or remainder of the construction duration, protected and covered side walkways would be maintained on both sides. Similar to the Eastern Avenue, cyclists would continue to share the available traffic lane with the motorist, and 501 TTC streetcar service would be maintained except during the full road closures, as I mentioned earlier, and the business and property accesses would be maintained. Now, coming back to Dundas and Logan bridges are mentioned here. Dundas bridge work would start in January 2023 and would last up to April 2025. And one eastbound and one westbound traffic lanes would be maintained during all times. Similar to the other two bridges, there will be multiple short-term 2 to 3 days full road closures for bridge deck replacement. Covered and protected pedestrian walkways would be maintained on both sides by Metrolinx. As you know, there is an existing bike lane on Dundas. Metrolinx plans to close the dedicated bike lane for the majority of the construction time, although during 2024, Metrolinx would be able to maintain bike lanes for about 8 months. For the remainder of the time when bike lanes are closed, the cyclist would be sharing the available traffic lane with Motorist. There is no transit connectivity along Dundas, and all the business and property access will be maintained. For the Logan Bridge, in terms of the construction duration, traffic lanes, and pedestrian connectivity impacts are pretty similar to the Dundas Breezeworks. In terms of the bicyclist connectivity, it's a better situation here. The dedicated bicycle lanes would be maintained except for periodic closures, which would be up to 6 months. And during the bike lane closures, cyclists would be sharing the available traffic lanes with Motorist. And there is, as you know, there is no transit service along Logan, and all the businesses and property accesses would be maintained as part of these Breezeworks. One thing I should mention here, that the timing and the impacts that are shown here, these are the latest from Metrolinx, and these could change based on further details from Metrolinx. So with that and details of the impacts for the Breezeworks, let's concentrate on the rail corridor work. And as I mentioned, that Metrolinx would require rail corridor track access points. That's basically the impact on the right-of-way. And as we have shown in this graphic here, Metrolinx in the first phase, they're going to working on the south side of the rail corridor, which is basically bottom of my screen. And the purple access point, access points are the locations where Metrolinx would require truck access. That's basically the locations on, in this case, the kind of on the east side of all of these rail bridges. And the south side works would be happening between November 2022 to April 2024. And as you can see here, there are a total of 8 access points that would be operating in this time. Most of these are actually 7 are on the south side, and there's just 1 on the north side that's connecting to Gerrard. Let's go into the next phase, where Metrolinx basically working on the north side of the rail corridor. And these would start in April and would continue up to December 2025, based on the latest Metrolinx plan. And all of these access points are on the north side. And as I mentioned, the Gerrard Street access points, these would still be continued during the north side works. So these are the overview of the impacts from the track access points. Let's go a little bit detail of the impacts in the next slide here. So all those red points here, those are the all of the access points, the total of 14 rail corridor track access points that would be required by Metrolinx for early works. But as I mentioned earlier, there would be only 8 accesses that would be utilized by Metrolinx at any given point, as the work will happen in 2 phases. And each of those access points would be approximately 5 meters wide with 2 meters shoulder on both sides. And as we learned from Metrolinx, there'd be approximately or less than 5 track accesses per access per hour. And the potential impacts that we heard from Metrolinx would be the potential conflicts between pedestrians and the construction vehicles at these access points, the truck turning movements when they're going in and out of the access points and accessing the roadway, that could cause delay to the general vehicular traffic, and there could be potential conflict with the on-street parkings which are next to these access points. Now, all the points that we mentioned so far, we are just talking about the impacts. We are going to come back a little bit later about the mitigation that we are suggesting and requesting Metrolinx to deliver. And before we do that, sorry, I still have the parking impact, which I want to cover here before getting into that. So this is an important slide, which basically shows the projected changes to the on-street and private parking that could happen as part of, as an impact from the early works that Metrolinx is planning. The bottom slide that basically shows the location of these impacted points. And in general, we could classify them in three categories: the impacts to pay and display parking. That's basically just one location north of Queen here. Impacts to on-street parking, daytime or permit parking, which are the location number 2 here on Degrassi. There'll be some impacts to some permit parking on Strain Street, and there'll be one permit parking impacted at First Avenue. And there'll be other impacts to on-street parking along Logan Avenue, approximately 20 to 30 spaces. And in terms of the private parking impacts, there are 2 locations, one in the Front Bond Ministry and another the laneway parking near Dundas and Logan Avenue. We're going to come into the details of mitigation for these, as I mentioned, a little bit later. And before that, let's just go through the way transportation services planning to manage the early works of manage the impacts of the early works construction. So through the construction, this is also a overview of the process that Metrolinx goes through during the construction process for managing the construction. So the first in that is that Metrolinx contractor will apply for street occupation and access permits, which basically to occupy the closed lanes, and the access permits to create the access points that I mentioned earlier for work within the city road right of way. And then city transportation services staff reviews the permit application and the related traffic management plan, which basically provides the detail of the mitigation plan with the following guiding principles. So the first, to review the construction staging plans, which are basically the phases of construction with the details of lane closure and mitigation, and the road safety requirements for safe accommodation of pedestrians and cyclists in the work zone. Review the construction site access points, as you just learned, those would be the access points to the rail corridor, and the proposed haul routes for trucks related to the construction. Use of paid duty police officers and traffic control persons to regulate and direct traffic, and also direct pedestrians and cyclists. Ensure safe access of general traffic, emergency vehicles, and transit vehicles. Assess and address construction operations and noise impact on the nearby noise-sensitive land uses. Impact on permit parking and engaging Metrolinx for accommodation. We're going to come on to that pretty soon. And traffic calming measures to discourage neighborhood traffic infiltration and speeding on the local street, not just right next to the construction zone, but thinking from an area-wide point of view. Maintain residential and property access. And last but not the least is traffic signal modifications for efficient flow of traffic. The other important aspect of it is Building Transit Faster Act, which the province recently passed, and that provides Metrolinx with tools needed to support the accelerated completion of priority transit projects, including the Ontario line. BFTA authorizes Metrolinx to remove obstructions and access work zones if they require it. So with all of that, let's go into what we, transportation services, requesting Metrolinx to mitigate the construction. And we broken them down by user type that you see on the left side of the screen, and to the overall road safety, and also to the rail corridor access points and the community impacts that are shown on the right of the screen. Let's go dig deep into each of them. So for pedestrians, Metrolinx, we would request Metrolinx to provide minimum of 1.8 meter wide protected covered pedestrian lanes, and the standard would be 2.1 meter in most places, in the curb lane where sidewalks have to be closed. And if sidewalks cannot be maintained, pedestrians are to be safely detoured to the alternate sidewalk at the nearest signalized crossing, which would be just the case for the Queen Street Breezeworks, as I mentioned earlier. Metrolinx contractor be actively managing safety at site accesses and egresses, and deploy trained professional traffic control persons, and thus minimizing conflicts between construction vehicles and vulnerable road users, including pedestrians and cyclists. The hoarding at the site accesses and egresses to be designed, ensuring sufficient sight lines are available are both for the vehicle drivers and pedestrians. The temporary traffic control devices and warning signage to be installed, ensuring that pedestrians and other road users are fully aware of the construction site access. To ensure accessibility, Metrolinx contractor would provide accessible, cane detectable temporary walkways in conformance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, which is called AODS in short, guidelines. Metrolinx contractor are going to provide temporary curb ramps to ensure easy access for people with mobility needs, and Metrolinx contractor would ensure temporary walkways are well lit, free of dust, debris, ice, and construction material. Let's look into the cyclist impact mitigation. So as I mentioned earlier, Metrolinx contractor are going to maintain bike lanes where safe and feasible, which would happen for most of Logan Avenue during the construction, and at some period during Dundas Street Breezeworks. And where the bike lanes are not feasible to maintain, Metrolinx and their contractor are going to maintain wider traffic lanes so that cyclists have space to safely navigate along with cars and share the available traffic lane. They would install clearly visible signage for positive guidance of cyclist movement in work zones. And last and not the least, Metrolinx contractor are going to maintain bike lanes and cyclist space free of dust, debris, ice, and construction material, similar to the pedestrian accommodation. For transit users, we are expecting Metrolinx contractor to maintain pedestrian access to all transit stops, and based on the information we learned from Metrolinx, all the transit stops along Queen beside the construction zone are going to be maintained. And Metrolinx are going to work with TTC to provide advanced information on transit detour during the short-term full road closures that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of the motorist impact mitigation, as I shown you earlier, that Metrolinx contractor are going to maintain at least one traffic lane in each direction at Eastern, Queen, Dundas, and Logan Avenue bridges during the construction. And during short-term temporary full road closures, Metrolinx contractor are going to provide advanced notification. Metrolinx and their contractor are going to install advanced advisory signage for positive guidance of motorists in the work zone. And Metrolinx are going to provide area-wide traffic signal modification recommendation for those to maximize the mobility of traffic and surface transit vehicles, and city are going to implement them. So in terms of road safety, as you know, City Council adopted the Vision Zero principle, which is basically minimizing, with a goal to minimize the traffic-related fatality and serious injuries, and to ensure that the safety of road users and mobility on an equitable basis for all road users are ensured. With that in mind, we would be requesting Metrolinx and their contractor to ensure pedestrian and cyclist safety at all times in work zones, And we would expect Metrolinx and their contractor to avoid construction truck staging and idling on the city roadways. Metrolinx to develop truck haul routes, ensuring Vision Zero principles that would include potentially lowering speed limit on the roadways and with forward truck movements and right in and right out maneuvers where they're feasible. And then Metrolinx and their contractor are going to avoid the haul routes near schools where feasible and restrict the truck movements to outside of the morning and afternoon school hours when kids are on the street. So as we detailed on the rail corridor access points, let's look into the mitigation measures that we would be asking Metrolinx to accommodate. We'd be requesting Metrolinx to ensure forward in and forward out truck movements. Metrolinx contractor to investigate restricting truck movements to the off-peak periods that we also mentioned in the previous slide. Maintaining safe pedestrian movements at all access points at all times, including requirements for separate traffic control persons for general traffic control and for pedestrian movements. Given the heavy pedestrian movements in this area, this is very important. Maintaining or accommodating adjacent impacted traffic parking spaces due to the truck movements at these access points. So now let's look into the mitigation of impacts on the related to the on-street and private parking. So as I mentioned, based on the three categories, Metrolinx to accommodate impacted on-street, which include overnight permit parking and daytime permit parking spaces at nearby off-street facilities. And there are two updates on these, as I mentioned here. Metrolinx is exploring to temporarily accommodate lost parking spaces, permit parking spaces that would be happening for Degrassi Street and on Strain Street. And they would be accommodating them at, or exploring to accommodate them at 8 and 10 Degrassi Street. That's a vacant lot now. And the second point, Metrolinx is working with the city to temporarily accommodate up to 25 parking spaces on Deacon Street. On the north side, there is a boulevard to accommodate that, to replace the impacted parking spaces on Logan Avenue. And in terms of the pay and display spaces, Metrolinx is going to compensate Toronto Parking Authority for lost revenue of the removed pay and display spaces. And regarding the lost private parking spaces, Metrolinx are going to accommodate them at a nearby location, and the two accessible parking spaces which would be lost at the front Bon side, Metrolinx will maintain them on site. So that's related to the parking related impact mitigation. We're almost done. In terms of the big picture impacts and mitigation related to construction hub, Metrolinx and their contractor are going to attend city's construction hub meetings and engage in construction coordination in the area. And Metrolinx and their contractor are expected to provide construction activities forecast to minimize concurrent construction activities and congestion on the roadways. And the last one is related to communication. We expect Metrolinx to provide advanced work information to the local community and businesses through different channels that I mentioned in the next bullet points. Metrolinx to establish a project website for Ontario Line with details of construction activities related to the early works. Metrolinx to provide project updates and information through traditional and electronic media. Those are the different channels that I mentioned a bit earlier. Metrolinx contractors are going to submit advanced road closure information to the city's road disruption activity reporting system, which is called RODARS in short. And this RODARS is linked to the web-based network service such as Google Maps or Waze. So you could get those information through Google Maps and Waze directly. And this information is also used by emergency services for route planning. And the last one, Metrolinx and their contractor are going to install network level advanced advisory signage. With that, our next step would be to negotiate with Metrolinx to ensure that the city requests are included in Metrolinx work plans and their contract documents. We are now transportation services continue to work with Metrolinx to better understand area-wide traffic impacts and mitigation. They provided us some technical details, including traffic management plan, and also through the traffic modeling, we are working with them to resolve all these impacts and mitigation. We'll ensure area-wide capital works coordination to minimize concurrent work on parallel routes and maximize traffic mobility and safety. Obviously working with Metrolinx on these as well. We are now coordinate with Metrolinx to establish construction liaison committee, and definitely we are gonna have ongoing discussions with you as we go through this process. And with that, I finish my presentation, and here are the contacts from Navi, our manager of the transit projects, and myself. If you have any question, please feel free to email any of us or call us. That's it, my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cycat, and it generated a lot of questions and also a number of comments. And I think everybody seeing this knows what huge impact there looks to be from this above ground section of the line. And one of the reasons why so many, I know of you on this webinar, have campaigned and pushed to have it go underground. There's a big question. Doug Ford isn't the premier next time. Can that be changed? I don't think that's up to the city to answer, but of course, we'd be certainly looking to continue to push to have this underground, because that is June. But those are some better questions to ask provincially. And I think there are some great suggestions in here about permit parking. Can it be only permit holding residents on the streets right around the construction? Andrew's got a great suggestion, Cycat, that could we have one way eastbound or westbound based on the morning or the afternoon, because the traffic, anybody on Dundas knows the traffic's basically westbound in the morning and eastbound in the afternoon. There's some great suggestions in here, and all of these suggestions will be turned over. All the questions and suggestions will go over. So I just want to note that all of your concerns are here. Some of these fantastic ideas are here. And there's a number of things I think we'll just answer live. And I'm just wondering, here's one from David, just wants to know, after, well, Eglinton Crosstown, of course, again, was another Metrolinx process, but I gather that around some of the traffic mitigation, they would be discussing things with the city. Were there insights from the Eglinton Crosstown construction that around road protocols, et cetera, that would be helpful for you here or for us to hear about here? Do you want to answer? Who would like to take that?
I'll take that, Councillor Fletcher.
Navi.
Hi, everyone. It's Navi Tatkar, the manager of Transit Infrastructure Projects Unit. We have been actively involved in Eglinton Crosstown LRT project and ensuring communication to the residents and ensuring the road safety of all the road users. So the biggest lesson that I would say that I have learned through that project is communication, and that is advanced communication. It is the key, because if we inform the residents or the road users early on about the upcoming road closures, we are basically enabling them to make choices that work in their favor. And that is the biggest lesson that I would say I have learned, our team has learned. And the other lesson is that, you know, using all the media, whether it's a traditional media, whether it's an electronic media, to our advantage, and disseminate that information to everyone, and coordinate with all the web-based services to ensure that people are directed around or detoured around those road closures effectively. So these are some of the lessons that I would share with you. And obviously, city transportation is very proactive in ensuring the road safety of the road users. We carefully look at all the traffic management plans, ensuring there is a proper signage, there is a proper accommodation for all the road users, including accessibility accommodations. So I can assure you one thing, that we have gained a lot of experience from those projects. We have gained a lot of experience dealing with the third party, which is Metrolinx in this case. And we have also gained experience in ensuring that your voices are heard and they're effectively passed on to Metrolinx, so we can incorporate them in the traffic management plan, and we can actually translate them in the field. You know, we have the staff who is able to go and check on those plans. We have the staff who's able to work with Metrolinx to make the tweaks, whether they're based on your feedback, whether they're based on our observation. We are able to do all that. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Navi. I think on this one, what are the structures to ensure the measures? Because on the mitigation slide, there were truck etiquette, roads, noise. Are there paid duty? Do you have people on the ground making sure that the permits, you know, what kind of staffing levels would there be from the city? What's being required, or what's Metrolinx said they will do? I think everybody's just a little concerned about them saying, oh, we'll do all of that and then not doing it. There's a great number of questions and comments in the chat and the Q&A about that. So what happens when they don't adhere, or what's the best practice to ensure that they adhere? Do we need more city staff on the ground while this construction's on the go? Please tell me in order to monitor what's going on, because if we do, I'll have to make that motion to get that staff complement beefed up.
Can you hear me,
Thank you,
Councilor
Count.
Fletcher? I can start now because it's part of everyone.
Barbara.
Thanks.
you.
I just wanted to talk about, I mean, it's really a pull all levers kind of an effort when you have such significant construction in neighborhoods. And so one of the things we did also learn up at along the Eglinton Crosstown was the real importance of having single point of contact on the ground who had the oversight and the team to be able to manage the construction as it goes along. So part of that, and CICAT talked about it in the presentation about the construction hub, which I know sounds like, I don't know what that sounds like to people, but in fact, what it is a single point of contact on the ground who's responding to not only the Metrolinx construction, but also coordinating around any other works that may be in the vicinity that may have any other impact on the traffic network. And that's also advanced planning, so that all of the contractors, including Metrolinx, who are working in the area are doing a 3-week look ahead consistently about all the works that are coming forward, so that they can actually have advanced strategic management of those impacts as well as on the ground. And I think while we have to continue to look at how many traffic safety personnel that we need, I know CICAT mentioned we want to make sure that we have enough to be paying attention not only to the truck access at the entrance points to all the work zone, but also the pedestrian movements, and that it needs to be separate people who are paying attention to that, because we really do need to ensure that that the impacts are being managed. So there's a number of things that we can do. We also have inspectors that are there on the ground who are able to hold the Metrolinx to account in terms of their permit conditions. And our staff is around to do that work. And Councillor Fletcher will certainly keep you apprised early as to whether we need additional staffing and resources, but certainly we are asking that of Metrolinx.
So Barbara, can you just add, is there a requirement, or can there be a requirement for there to be a construction liaison committee meeting? When you're getting permits, or they're getting permits for different things to occupy the right of way or change traffic, that there be a requirement that there be that construction liaison committee? Can the city ask for that, which everybody could join in weekly or however long during this construction, because it's pretty overwhelming?
Yeah, Councillor Fletcher, it's Navi again. Yes, definitely there will be a construction liaison committee, just like there is on the LRT projects as well. From that experience, I can tell you that there will be a monthly meeting, and that's the practice that Metrolinx is planned to put it to go
Yes,
forward
but
with.
can we have a weekly meeting?
We can
Can we
certainly
ask for that?
request that, Councillor. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, this is why we are here today, is sort of an exchange of information and ideas, and where we can, you know, make sure that there is a minimal impact on the community, and making sure that we can respond back to the community in an effective way. So definitely, you know, we can take that back if there can
I'm
be a
hearing people
weekly.
want to be very involved and know what's going on regularly, and so having something that's having something that's regular, where not once a month, because there's noise, there's vibration, there's dust. Are you living up to your requirements that you've said you'll do? A number of people have asked why Metrolinx isn't here. Metrolinx has a lot of meetings, and this is a meeting. I know about these things. This is what's been requested of the city. I have city staff here to tell you what's been requested. I'm sure Metrolinx will be having a meeting at some point, and I hope that this information will be helpful to you when that meeting is held, in order to make requests of them directly from the community. So if you've been on a lot of those Metrolinx meetings, sometimes they're a tiny bit frustrating. So I think it's better just to have straight up facts, and then we can take it from there. However you might like to have a Metrolinx on, or I know they are going to have so many meetings, and they have a liaison office. So I'm glad to hear that construction liaison committee, but I would think it's better to have it more than once a month. That isn't how our community rolls. We want, if this goes forward, we need to know, and they need to know how everything's going directly. And one thing is, we're never shy to let people know. And so that's from this side. I just want to, there's a whole number of things, and we're going to go to the kind of parks thing in a minute, but I just want to ask, and I have a few of the questions answered that have come in specifically around the transportation issues. And how are you foreseeing that you'll keep it safe when there's bikes? What are you telling Metrolinx to do to keep it safe when there are bikes, streetcars, and cars in exactly the same lane, and construction on the other side?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take that question. Obviously, we want to make sure the first and foremost thing is that our vulnerable road users are safe, and in this case, on the road, you know, bicyclists are definitely, they qualify in that category. So we want to make sure that if there is a single lane of travel lane for transportation, then there is enough width available where there is a sufficient space around the bicyclists where they can safely travel around the motorists. If the lanes are not wide enough, then we definitely want to rely on the good practices and the good guidelines that have been outlined in Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, that really specifies how the cyclist should be treated on the roadway and what signage should be placed effectively. So we will definitely rely on those guidelines and our past experiences to ensure that that the bicyclist safety is effectively addressed in the work zones.
Thank you. And there are folks on here who are from the north of Gerrard and wondering what it's going to look like there. And I've said in the Q&A that we don't have all that information yet from Metrolinx. This is their first early works area. When that becomes available and they make those requests to the city, very happy to have a similar meeting with people who live north of Gerrard up to Pape, because there's going to be a lot of construction on Carl Gerrard and at Pape itself. There's one question from Andrew about how can we avoid the ugly wall? And good news, Andrew, is that through, as mentioned, that there is a committee that's working to have a public process around design to have not an ugly wall, assuming the wall would go ahead. And Shelley Klein and others on this call know about that. So when that moment comes that you get to see the proposals, we'll certainly make sure you get all of that information. because nobody, first of all, wants to see a wall. They'd rather see trees, but we have to make sure that that's not an ugly wall. What kind of hours are work hours for this construction? Are they traditional work hours, 7 to 7? What about weekends? Or does Metrolinx, because they have the Building Transit Faster Act, can they just impose the work hours that they want?
So Councillor, maybe I'll take a shot at this first. It's Derek Toigo speaking. So we've been working with Metrolinx. They've confirmed at this point in time that the regular working hours will be between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. But they will be working with the city, and they will be obviously engaging with transportation services, ourselves, as well as other people, other folks that are impacted to make sure that they are minimizing the amount of time that they're working. But they will need a fair bit of time to actually get this work done as quickly as possible.
So most important is that construction liaison committee. When there's that's almost,
yes,
a lot of hours. And well, Cafe TO, I'm going to ask you, Barbara, what's going to happen to Cafe TO when this is all going on?
So certainly we continue to work to navigate and keep the cafes in place that are not at all going to be impacted. And when there are issues, because we've had some issues like on Queen Street, where we've had to try to stage and phase work in order to try to protect the cafe locations during the season and try to get the work that needed to be done in the areas where the cafes are most impacted at the beginning and the end of the season. So we'll work to try to minimize the impacts on cafes. Given that we start in October, it's really going to be something that we need to be very vigilant about for next season and make sure that we're monitoring that and have enough advance notice and the knowledge of where cafes have been over time. So we'll be 3 years in, it'll be 4 years next year on Cafe TO. Granted, there are lots of different restaurants coming and going, but we definitely know where there are repeat customers. So we will definitely take that into account.
Thank you. And has there been traffic modeling done by Metrolinx that they've shared with the city for their plans, or who is doing that traffic modeling?
Councillor Fletcher, I can take that. So Metrolinx has undertaken the traffic modeling. In their traffic modeling, in the traffic study area, they have analyzed the important intersections as the traffic gets diverted, how the intersection operations will be, what traffic signal modifications will be required for efficient flow of traffic through those intersections. So they have analyzed that. And on top of that, they have also included the lane obstructions from any other works that is going to be happening, in the area of, let's say, the study area or the area of influence. So they have tried to superimpose that as well and try to see the cumulative impact of all the works, including the Ontario Line works. Currently, we are reviewing that traffic analysis. We are making some tweaks to those traffic analysis, and obviously we will be presenting those findings later in the future. Councillor, to your office as well, we'll be sharing that.
This is something that Metrolinx could be asked to present, though, when they come forward, correct?
Correct.
Something
Yeah. I mean, that.
For?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can ask
And
for that.
some
in
suggestions.
fact, Councillor, it should be Metrolinx that should be presenting this.
Yes, they will present that at their. That's correct. Thank you, Derek. That's part of their requirement. So I think that having heard this, those of you who want to know about traffic modeling and what that's going to look like, this is kind of your background. So when they have that meeting, you know a lot about it already. It's not just your first time and you've had a chance to think about it. So I will share this deck with everyone, so you're well prepared to really make a difference with Metrolinx when they have that meeting. I just want to know about the suggestion of having traffic go one direction westbound. It's kind of like Jarvis, where that light is, in the middle of Jarvis Street, you have the one lane that sometimes you're going south and sometimes it's used for going north. Has there been any thought for that? Because the Gardner is also coming down, and Lakeshore is not fully operational, probably won't be during this time. Is that kind of a suggestion something that you've given any thought to? Or is it even feasible? Because a lot of people are suggesting it.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Navi again. So it's a good suggestion. You know, I think any observation or any suggestion from the community is worth exploring. And I have to be honest with you, at this point in time, we have not gone in that direction, but definitely we'll take this message back and see how that fits in the overall area-wide traffic flow. Because, you know, sometimes we direct the traffic one way, but we are also limiting a lot of the accesses. So how we bring that traffic in and how much of a detour for those road users will be, that will have to be taken into account. But definitely we'll explore and get back to you on this.
Yeah, I think getting back, because if people are coming from the east, from Scarborough, from the beach, they all use Eastern to get downtown in the morning, and they all use it to get back uptown or back east in the afternoon. So it's a really good suggestion. It's different, it's radical, but this is what we're talking about, mitigation. So we're just trying to help you with that. So there are, can you say there's 5 trucks per hour? You're talking about 5 trucks per hour when you showed that CICAT going up and down from the tracks, those entry points. Is that during the whole working time, or is there something, do they have to tell you, here's what we're doing and here's when we're going to have trucks and here's where the police are, etc.?
Yeah, Councillor, I can probably start, and Navi and others, they can probably supplement. So Metrolinx shared with us that there could be a total of 100 trucks at all the access points and the Breezeworks. And at any of the access point, there could be up to 5 trucks in each of the hours. And that's generally considering the off-peak hours. So if you consider just the off-peak hours, say from 9 to 3, then you would see at each of the access points going just in one direction, up to 5 trucks at each of them. That's.
And as Metrolinx said, they will have a paid duty officer at all of those locations?
Yes, Councillor. So we discussed with Metrolinx, and in their traffic management plan, they included that they're gonna include 2 traffic control persons, 1 for each direction for general traffic movement, and then 1 dedicated traffic control person who would be guiding the pedestrians at that particular access point.
There's another question when you showed the entry points and the access points, number 13 and 14 are near the Pape Avenue pedestrian bridge. And that is the only walking bridge to get over the tracks. And there's a concern that people won't be able to get over the tracks.
Right,
How will that
Councillor.
be safe? What's happening with that?
Yeah,
in their proposal, how are they going to keep pedestrians safe and moving?
Right, Councillor. Yeah, we discussed that with Metrolinx, and our understanding is that trucks are going to access from Pape Avenue through the parking lot that is right beside the Food Basics, through that area into the rail corridor. So the pedestrian breeze access would be maintained. Maybe they would need to concentrate on the making the pedestrians safer by having more traffic control person or something similar, but the pedestrian access would be maintained. That we learned.
Thank you. And of
Just
course,
yes,
I'm
sorry,
ahead,
Councillor Fletcher.
Yep.
I was just
Yep.
going to ask, I just wanted to clarify, CICAT, because you said off-peak hours on the truck traffic. And I just wanted to clarify, because one of the earlier slides indicated that there would not be truck activity during school hours. So I would assume that the 3 o'clock timeline would depend on access and proximity to schools. Just to clarify that there will be no truck access during school times, because I'm sure that would be of great concern to people.
And you did mention that there'll be a traffic mitigation plan that Metrolinx has to submit, or that they're planning to create. Do you understand? Are you aware if they're planning to share that?
Hi, Councillor, it's Navi again. Yes, as part of the permitting requirement, Metrolinx will have to have a traffic management plan. And as part of that traffic management plan, they have to show us all the mitigation measures to protect our road users, to protect the community. So definitely that will be the permitting requirement from the city. So they will have to submit that.
And then will people have a chance to review that by Metrolinx, do you think? Or is that a public document?
All our permits, yeah. I mean, we share the details, any specific details with your office, we can share that, not an issue. Because after all, we are here trying to safeguard the interests of the public, and definitely there is no issue sharing those details with your office.
Thank you very much. I think it's 8:10. We're going to go over to the parks folks now who have looking at what the impact will be, particularly on the trees. We could come back and look at the actual parks impact, but we fought so hard on this one. They're trying to really not have a lot of impacts on our parks. And of course, after everything you've seen, you know why there's such a strong desire to have this underground rather than above ground. And it's a great idea to have transit. We are a community that uses transit, supports transit. We have almost 100 acres of transit in our ward, but all the subway cars, all the street cars, maintenance, it's all in this area, south of the tracks actually. And so really and truly, the desire to have it underground is because what we're seeing here is a number of years of potentially chaos. And it's not on one street like Eglinton, it's on, you're seeing across Eastern, Queen, Dundas, and Gerrard. It's really quite something. So that's the road impact that we know about, because we've now had the request from Metrolinx for the city to look at in order for them to start their work. They also have requests to the Parks Department, particularly around the trees. You saw they have to get up and down, and you've all seen that every single tree in the corridor is simply gone. And as it gets to be spring and we're expecting to see leafy green, that's not there. And I know we are all very, very sad about that. And they do want more trees in order to wreck the walls and get on and off the track. So I'd just like to ask, I think, Tina, you're going to be giving that presentation tonight.
That's
Thank
correct.
you very
Thank you,
much.
Councillor. Good evening, everyone. I will just pull up the presentation here. And okay. All right, so I know there was a lot of information to share with everyone this evening, but tonight our focus is going to be on the construction access points and how they impact parks and trees. So the overview of our presentation will just be the framework for Metrolinx projects and how they are sent to us, where the Metrolinx construction access points and how they interact with our parks. The result of City Parks Forestry comments to date on some of the access points, and I'll focus on access point number 12 and speak to a few more details at that location. And then we'll get into some of the next steps and further requests that the city has made to further mitigate some of the impacts from these construction access points. So framework for these projects is typically Metrolinx will send over their projects in several phases and contracts. And the way they're divided is that the early works or the early and advanced works will typically hold or carry over a number of the tree removals. And it will be the last contract that is responsible for the restoration and a number of the planting aspects of the project. So this particular joint corridor that we've been speaking about tonight is considered an early works contract. So it will deliver the first portion of tree removals. So from a staff perspective, through our bylaws, we have the capacity to make decisions on the scope of tree removals and injuries, or as well as suggest appropriate methods for authorizing park access. So when it comes to a long-term construction access point that we're speaking of tonight, those would typically be a license agreement. And for any of the shorter term potential tree removals, it would be through a park access agreement. So as was noted earlier, a couple of times now, the province has passed the Building Transit Faster Act. And it does provide Metrolinx with the tools needed so that they can accelerate their construction. And it includes removal of obstructions and access to work zones. And this would apply to tree permits. So from the regulatory framework for Metrolinx, when it comes to their own lands, Metrolinx would be following their own vegetation guidelines under the guidance of the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. On city-owned and private lands, Metrolinx has agreed to follow the Toronto, our municipal tree bylaws when it comes to compensation. And that would mean that they would be applying for permits for those bylaw protected trees. Now, under the authorities of our municipal bylaws, the city is provided the opportunity to provide input and make an effort to minimize the impacts of those existing trees, and of course, require compensation. And when those permits are issued for tree removals and tree injuries, we're looking for compensation requirements of a 3-to-1 for park, street, and private trees captured under our bylaw. And where trees cannot be planted, we would be seeking cash in lieu of $5.83 per tree. So within the limits of the joint corridor, there are no ravine protected areas. So the compensation requirements would be for park, street, and private trees. And at this time, the city has not received any applications or tree permit applications related to the construction access points for the joint corridor. So now where these construction access points actually lie, so there's a total of 7 on either side of the rail corridor. So a total of 14, forgive me, 7 on either side, total of 14. And the proposed access points will involve the removal of both bylaw protected trees and not protected by city bylaw trees. So based on the current information that we have to date, there are 4 locations which we've identified in green on this plan that are adjacent to parks in Ward 14. So starting from the south, there is an access point from the north side of McCleary Playground. There is an access point from the south side of Jimmie Simpson Park at Queen. There's also an access point at the north side of Bruce Mackey Park from Dundas Street, and the 4th would be from Gerrard Carla Parkette. There are 3 locations of these 11 that will not involve tree removal, and the remaining 11, or sorry, of the 14, 3 locations will not involve tree removals, and the remaining 11 will. And based on the information we have right now, the 11 locations represent approximately 53 proposed removals, of which we can assess 26 are trees of invasive species. And based on the locations 6, 11, and 12 involve the largest number of tree removals, and that would be 6 and 11 are staging and laydown areas for Metrolinx, as is 12. 12 will be a primary access point for Metrolinx and a future station. So to date, through the comments the city has made, in particular Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, we've managed to make some changes in where Metrolinx accesses their corridor. So through our comments, we've managed to eliminate an access point from Wardell Street through Bruce Mackey, another eliminated from Booth Avenue through Jimmie Simpson Park. We've also eliminated a turnaround for construction vehicles within Jimmie Simpson Park. We've also eliminated construction staging area from McCleary Playground, but as mentioned, there is still a construction access point for vehicles. And as a result of eliminating those, the effort has been to minimize tree impacts at those locations. So with other input that Parks has given on the construction access points, we've also managed to protect for a phased closure of Gerrard Carlaw Parquet. And that was, that's location 12, which I will get to in a second. But through our commenting, we've managed to get the phased closure to keep the dog off leash area open as long as possible. And of course, we'll be discussing with Metrolinx ways to mitigate impacts to the dog off leash. And that would be, of course, primarily through the phased closure. So getting into the detail of access point 12. So this is Gerrard and Carlaw Parquet, where we have a very well-used dog off leash area for the community. Metrolinx is proposing starting fall 2022, they would be requesting this partial closure in order to demolish the buildings at First Avenue and complete utility relocations. And then through 23 and 24, they will continue to use the same access point to access their corridor for retaining walls and noise barriers. And there will be a short closure within the park to relocate some storm sewer that currently exists within the park. That's part of their utility relocations. And then starting 2025 is when there will be a full closure of the dog off leash. And that scope of work will include tree removals to support utility work. And then of course, infrastructure for the future station. And then following the station construction, there would be construction of the station and plaza. So what we are working on with Metrolinx, and we have requested of them, is that they would coordinate public consultation on an appropriate location for the interim DOLA. So some additional requests that we are making to Metrolinx to further mitigate these impacts. Of course, that they should be investigating how to avoid tree impacts to the greatest extent at any of these access points, and that they must maintain minimum tree protection zones along any of the trees that are being protected. And where tree protection zones cannot be met or bylaw protected trees require removal, that they would be coming to the city for urban forestry permit applications. So some of the other details that we've asked Metrolinx and their contractors to consider include reducing the width of the access just to reduce the actual amount of land that they need. Ensuring that their access ramps and driveways would be paved to mitigate dust and any debris adjacent to our parks. Enhancing the solid hoarding and safety barrier, again, for these locations adjacent to our parks. A big issue for us is obviously maintaining safe public access and allowing PFNR staff to carry out daily operations at all times. And minimizing laydown areas and driveways on any soft surfaces to ensure full restoration once they're done. And part of their scope of work would be to conduct pre, post, and daily inspection reports of both their work areas and adjacent parks. Should there be any impact to parkland, including removal or relocation of park assets, then they would definitely need to come to Parks Forestry and Recreation to negotiate any of those impacts before undertaken. And with respect specifically to a location like Gerrard and Carlaw Parquet, what we are working towards is that Metrolinx would secure an interim DOLA location in advance of the full closure scheduled for 2025. So those are a number of the items that we're working with Metrolinx on for mitigation. So that is what our focus was for this evening. But of course, if there's any other questions, and I think Councillor alluded to a further conversation of other impacts from the joint corridor.
Thanks so much, Tina, for that. It's very informative. And again, just go back beginning, don't shoot the messenger. This is what Metrolinx is asking. I think you've really showed that you've been able to negotiate a number of mitigation pieces already as far as entrances in certain parks. And I think that's very much appreciated. There was a question about how you get on at Paisley. And I think you've mentioned that particular piece has been removed, but everybody's going to be checking because they're going to get these decks when it's over. And you mentioned the relocation. Quite a few people in the questions have asked about the temporary off leash, because Gerrard and Carla, I forget, I set that up maybe 15, 12 years ago. It's very popular. It's had a lot of great upgrades, and it's where everybody goes, particularly from Carla and the neighborhood, to walk their dogs. So are there some locations that you can share with us? Do you want people to give you locations they think are a good idea? Can you move it over to the other side of the bridge? The east
Yeah,
side
we
of
would.
that bridge? What are you thinking? What's your thinking, please?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We would definitely be open to suggestions from the community. Ideally, it would be a location in proximity to this existing location, because we know that this is a high demand area. As Parks, Forestry and Recreation, we're obviously sensitive to converting parks in the area that have significant number of trees in them to a dog off leash area, so that we can minimize some of the impacts to those trees. But if there are public suggestions about locations that they see that may be suitable, we would definitely investigate those for feasibility.
Thank you. There's a question here, and I think it just needs to be answered. Would all of these early works need to go ahead for the purposes of widening and upgrading the GO corridor, which we know that the GO corridor was being widened from 3 tracks to 4 tracks? Would all of this had to happen to widen the GO corridor? And I think I can just give you a very definite no. It would not have to happen to widen the GO corridor. This is all happening because Metrolinx is adding the 2 above ground tracks along the corridor, and that's just the facts rather than put it underground. So for those of you who've joined late, that's what's happening. You know that. And what we'll send out, when I send this out, Save Jimmie Simpson is very active in trying to put this underground. There's a lot of folks that are concerned about the Ontario line and the construction of it across the city, and wherever there's an Ontario line, Flemington Park's upset, First Parliament folks are upset. And then there's something called an MZO, which the province, who does have a tremendous amount of power, if you don't realize that, they do have power over the city in a way that you probably don't know, because cities are constitutionally under the authority of the province. And this particular government has used that and continues to use that. So a ministerial zoning order is when the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing simply says, City of Toronto, this is what we're going to do on this land, or we're expropriating this. It's quite draconian. You've not seen it before, and it's quite shocking, despite all of the good efforts to say it's probably cost the same, least amount of disruption. They so far have simply refused to put that underground. And I think one of the questions that I'd like to get back to just quickly on the transportation side is people recognize in this community that Lakeshore is a mere shadow of its former self, and there's no gardener. So how does that fit when you're looking at traffic planning? Does Metrolinx have to take that into account? How does the city think about that? Because there just is going to be no corridor of any kind to move through the East End. People are quite worried about that. Thank you. Who wants to answer that one? Not an easy one.
No, it's definitely not an easy one, to be honest with you, Councillor Fletcher. Capital Works coordination, and on top having this Ontario Line works happening on number of roadways. It is a challenging task, no matter how much of an expert we claim we are. But definitely from the lens of establishing a construction hub, as Barbara mentioned, we are going to be holistically looking at all these projects and making sure that our arteries, the roadway arteries, our roads don't get blocked with the construction traffic, and how we can eliminate these activities happening concurrently. So that is something that we're going to actively look at through Construction Hub, through our capital works coordination. It is going to be a coordinated effort between Metrolinx and also the city staff. So I must say that it is a challenging task, but we are definitely looking at it.
Mavi, can I also add to that one? If you don't add to that, we're also looking at like some different ways of doing the closures, working around the area BIAs. Some of the BIAs are closed on Monday, so we're going to push to have some of the closures instead of on weekends. We'll do it like a Monday, Tuesday. We're looking at different venues of different areas, like the stuff that's happening down the Portlands. We're trying to work with them so we're not affecting it at the same time. And can I add back on to one of SciCat's comments about the cycling lanes? I just like to put it out there that the bike lanes would be technically closed just under bridges. It's not the cycling lanes completely, it's under bridges. And some of those lane closures will work in line with like Cafe TO. So they're already affected being closed. So we're working in conjunction trying to alleviate some of the big impacts.
Thank you.
Also,
Sorry,
I just
go ahead.
wanted to add, just on the point of all the construction that's happening down in East Harbor and the Gardner and everything else, the city teams get together once a month and we look quite actively at the coordination of that work. And we look at it a number of years out as well. So as the works get closer to implementation, we're very active in trying to minimize impacts on parallel corridors. I think it's fair to say, Councillor Fletcher, and you said it, and it's absolutely true, there will definitely be some impact versus if there were no construction, absolutely. So this is going to be a very busy area for construction, and that's why we're very happy to be here tonight, and also to be making sure that we're bringing enough resources to the table to help manage this, and not just do that in the field actively, but also be planning that in advance.
Barbara, can I add to that? I know there's like monthly meetings, but on an average week, there's probably 3-4 meetings with all the different hub coordinators, senior PMs, and we're talking about everybody's projects, what dates. We're trying to coordinate everything through so it's not impacting everybody at once.
Great, thanks, Terry.
So Terry, you just said that looking at the days of the heavy duty closures might be a Monday or Tuesday in order for the Queen Street businesses in particular. Not to have closures on the weekend. And that's a conversation with the BIAs, because everybody on this call definitely supports their local business community and does not want to see a decimation of the community.
Absolutely. We started those conversations with the BIA and your office, and we're working out details to say what works best. It's not what works best for Metrolinx, it's what works best for everybody. So we're really trying to coordinate it and work with everybody. So everybody has an opinion and a voice.
And that's partly what this is, because you're making recommendations back to Metrolinx and they would automatically just have a weekend closure. And you're going back to say, maybe it shouldn't be weekend, it should be the light days, the darker days for the businesses, and keep Queen Street alive and well for the weekends. But that's a conversation with businesses and you're engaged in that and you'll give that information back. Right.
And Councillor can also add, we're looking at events too. So if there's events scheduled in the area, we're going to try work. We're not going to try. We're going to really work hard not to affect anything that's already planned.
Thank you. Lisa wants to give a big shout out to Eon Song, and I'm going to shout that out, and to Maggie Redmonds and to everybody on SJS, because they've really pushed so hard. And part of the pushing is that we are trying to limit all the impact, first of all, to get it underground, which is heavy lifting, haven't made it there yet, but to really protect the parks and green spaces that Metrolinx doesn't own, but the city owns. And again, they do have the ability to reach in and do things. This is, I think the approach of the city is try to say, please, we know the city, we have businesses, we have roads, we want to advise you so you have, you don't just minimize the disruption, because they don't live here, they don't have property here, they just want to build their thing above ground. So there you go. Somebody wants to know about the $500 for the trees, or 583. Adam thinks it might just be too low. And what about tree replacement rather than simply getting money for the trees? Do you want to answer that, Tina, or do you want Kim to answer that?
I can. Good evening, Councillor and everyone. This is Kim Statham, Acting Director of Urban Forestry. So the 583 per tree is dictated through our bylaws, and whether the trees are replaced or whether we take cash in lieu isn't just up to Metrolinx. It of course is a conversation through our negotiation. We always look to mitigate and kind of replace the trees that have been impacted on site and in place. So that is always our first choice. Where that cannot happen, and sometimes it can't because of space requirements or other issues, then that money is contributed to the city's tree canopy fund and our planting programs that we work and replace trees first in the neighborhood and then across the city.
And you have a planting plan that will show where you're trying to put trees back once you see where they're taking them up?
That would be part of the conversation that we would come up with through the permit review.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions just about those who are living close to the tracks. So is it possible to plant sound deadening trees or some kind of greenery around Tiverton Park and Ray McCleary Towers, which is the seniors tower? Noise mitigation is Metrolinx is responsible for noise mitigation. So that's a good question when we get to one of those meetings with them, what they're planning to do. But is there anything that you can think of from a park standpoint that would deaden the sound for people living there for construction?
So in general, sorry, I'm going to let Mark take this.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mark Ventresca. I'm, I guess, forestry lead for Metrolinx projects. Yeah, we've been having those discussions with Metrolinx about where to plant early. They have been interested. Part of our concerns are about planting when we don't exactly know what they're doing with the next stages. And so it's one thing to say we can plant trees in certain spots, but we need to be sure that it's not spots that Metrolinx is going to be needing to access in the future as part of the project. So we're certainly looking to see what we can do to get some of the trees in early and in locations where it's pretty clear that Metrolinx won't be doing any damage in the future. Yeah, it's a bit of a moving target right now, and we haven't managed to nail down any particular sites where we can do that.
Thank you, but you're looking at it.
Yes.
Yes. Great, thank you very much. Tina, you wanted to just talk about the Jimmie Simpson Park and some of the access issues. Do you want to?
I did. Yeah, I just was noticing some of the comments and I just wanted to clarify. So the access point from the north side of Queen into the corridor is not intended to affect the community center. There will be a direct access from the right of way into their corridor. There is no expectation that the community center will be removed or any short-term or long-term impacts outside of just needing access to our garbage area on the south side of our building. So I just wanted to clarify that.
So you're talking about the impacts coming in from Queen Street will be?
Correct. On the north side of Queen into the corridor.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. And then just going back, does anybody just want to look at under the Building Transit Faster Act? Is there any way to ensure that Metrolinx can't just do what they'd like, or is that the final? Is that the big hammer if there's no cooperation? I don't know who. I suppose.
So,
Gary,
Councillor, maybe I'll I'll try to answer this one. So the Building Transit Faster Act is legislation that allows Metrolinx through approval by the provincial government. So this is not an automatic. They do have to seek permissions from the government to actually enforce some of the requirements. It is very broad ranging. It does allow them to do this. So if there are times when there are I'm going to call them disputes between the city and Metrolinx with regards to a particular item, there is an opportunity for us to go to the province and seek their direction on the particular enforcement that may be required.
Okay, thank you. Just on the tree ratio, because this is a tree loving community, all you city staff that are here tonight, and those of you from Parks, Forestry and Recreation certainly know that. Everybody's just brokenhearted when they look at the rail line. That can we not get a 5-to-1 replacement? That is sometimes that's negotiated in developments rather than a 3-to-1 replacement. What would have to happen to get that?
Hi, Councillor. So yeah, the 3-to-1 is a standard replacement. 5-to-1 is usually used for enforcement. So if there's been somebody's not been compliant, we would issue an order, and that order would include 5-to-1 replacement for trees that have been lost. It's pretty rare to do any negotiations in development to get up to that height of 5-to-1. It's pretty standard to have 3-to-1 across the board. It's the intention is that for every tree Metrolinx is removing, no matter the size, they'd be responsible for replacing up to 3 trees. And we would be enforcing that effectively through our end by going through, working with them on their planting plans, and then anything they can't plant, we'd be looking to plant elsewhere ourselves. So we wouldn't be leaving it in Metrolinx's hands in the future. It would be the city then taking that money from Metrolinx. And the $500, I know there's been some comments about it being cheap. There's lots of opinions we can have on that. However, it does cover the city costs in planting a tree and putting it through its establishment period for 2 years. So I mean, it's not meant to be a profit-making venture. It's meant to plant trees.
So there's a 2-year warranty. There could be more than 3-to-1, and hopefully we can have bigger trees than little wee tiny things, because we're losing fairly major. Is that possible?
It's certainly something we can discuss with Metrolinx. Once again, usually the standards are the 70mm caliper trees, which are more like the trees that you see going in around developments than you would anywhere else for the most part. So they are larger trees in the first place.
That is something that the community can ask, though, because that will be, these are the ask to Metrolinx. There's many things the community can still ask to Metrolinx. I think that might be one of them around the trees, given the heartbreak that we're experiencing. What about the air quality? Who is Metrolinx required to examine the air quality during demolition and construction on the tracks? Derek, maybe you should answer that. What's their requirement?
So there is a requirement that they monitor actively the air conditions in and around the construction sites, the noise conditions in and around the construction site, as well as the vibration. And these are all, there's all provincially mandated levels that they need to achieve, and these will be reported on a regular basis to the city, so that we can obviously share it with everybody. That's so it'll be discussed at the the construction liaison committees, but we can also share that information.
And if there's a construction liaison committee, that would be brought there. Can the city require Metrolinx to bring that there?
If there are issues, Councillor, where items such as noise and vibration and air quality, that would be, I would think, one of the areas where that item would be discussed. But it would also be discussed by Transit Expansion with Metrolinx directly.
Can there be something written into the traffic management plan that they have to submit around idling trucks in the neighborhood, or people that are coming to build that, particularly around Gerrard and Carlaw, because that's where the portal will be, to require that parking of those people coming to build, they can't park in the neighborhood. There's many suggestions here and concerns about being overwhelmed. First of all, losing parking, and then being overwhelmed by those coming to build the Ontario line. They're coming here, they don't live here, they're coming here. Where are they going to park? What are those requirements for them to park off site and be brought to the site every day?
Hi, Councillor. I'll take that as Navi. So regarding truck idling, definitely we'll address that as part of our permit condition, making sure that the construction trucks do not stage on the city roads and then idle. So basically, they'll have to follow the city's idling bylaw. And in terms of your second question, Councillor, if you don't mind repeating the second question.
That is the idling bylaw, and when there's a big construction site, people are coming to work at it. And
Oh
then
yeah,
they're
definitely.
driving there.
Yes.
But we don't want them parking there.
No.
We want them to be parking somewhere else. Can
Yeah.
we force
Yeah.
with the permits for Metrolinx to have a big parking somewhere down south, somewhere else? And
Absolutely.
then come to the site. How do you do that?
So we have done that even with the private developers, especially the big projects in the downtown area where parking is quite limited, and we want to make sure this additional traffic in the downtown, or workers that come to work over there, they don't, first of all, bring their personal vehicles, and they don't park in the work zone. So that is going to be prohibited through the permit conditions. And second, they don't park on the city streets. So we're going to be actively working with Metrolinx to ensure that they can train and talk to their contractors to make sure that their contractors either carpool or they take transit, or because the area is well connected with the transit facilities. And we will also be using our permit conditions as a tool to ensure that Metrolinx and their contractor follow these conditions and adhere to them.
Navi, can I add to, they're looking at Dickens, off of Dickens Street there, a staging area for their cars and vehicles. So they'll have private property to park their own vehicles on and not on city.
Just speaking of Dickens, there's been a question because everybody, you may not know, but Metrolinx can't expropriate any property they feel they need in order to build the Ontario line or any transit project. I know this is all really shocking information. You didn't think they could do that, but they can. And they have expropriated 388 Carlaw, which is, the building. It runs from Dickens up to Gerrard. It's lots of things going on in there. And what I'm just giving you this may be an overflow parking. It's also their staging area. The No Frills parking lot will be where the portal is built for it to go underground, and all where the tunnel boring machine will be. I think that's a topic for another meeting, but that means that all the soil, in order to build the Ontario line, Derek, you can confirm this, that the tunnel boring machine goes in, takes the soil, brings it back, and then trucks drive it off the site. So not only is this happening between Gerrard and East Harbor, but north of Gerrard at No Frills site will be the staging area for the portal and all of the trucks and all of the soil. Do you want
That's
to just
correct,
confirm
Councillor.
that? So would you agree that that's a pretty high impact, all in this small zone, basically south of Riverdale down to Eastern?
Are you asking, Councillor?
Yes,
I
am.
I would agree.
How will that add, and how will we look at how that's going to add to that? It's another reason why it's so crazy to have it above ground, because this portal that's going to be built and the impact of the tunnel boring machine there is really going to be overwhelming. And
you're quite right, Councillor, that the impact, the tunnel, the twin tunnel boring machines that will be going in there, plus the staging, the laydown area, plus the soils laydown area, storage area, will take up that significant portion of that site. It will, I think, it all told, be almost 17,000 square meters that will be taken out. That entire site where the No Frills is currently is going to be used as the location for the TBM as well as the laydown areas.
the TBN, tunnel boring
Machine. My apologies.
You're talking your lingo with your folks, and our lingo, we don't know what that means. Tunnel boring machine.
Tunnel boring machine.
I think that's a 6-acre site, so everybody understands just how big that is, and what a big project this really, really is. Just for the hours of operation, perhaps or is it 6 to 11 every day, or just Monday to Friday, etc.? How have they done that in other locations?
So Councillor, maybe I'll take a shot at this, and then
What
if
did
there's
they do
anybody.
in Eglinton? Mhm.
So typically they work between 7 to 11 p.m. There are locations where, depending on the permission that they receive from the city, that they could work 24 hours a day. That's not what they've indicated at this point in time, but that could happen in certain locations. But typically it's between 6 and 11 p.m. that they will be working. I think the earlier time, like 6 a.m. time, would be in locations near more commercial areas or industrial areas, as opposed to near where the residences are. So I would say 6 to 11 is the range of time that they would actually be working.
Is there any way to secure that timing and being close to residential for certain working hours, such as in the evening?
Again, Councillor, I think one of the things that we're going to need to do with Metrolinx is work with them to make sure that they understand that they need to be good neighbors with the residents, that it is going to impact the residents. So there is going to be, continued work with them to make sure that they understand the impact that they're going to have on the city and the residents in that area.
Thank you. One of the questions here is about active TO. Will active TO be enforced on the lakeshore? And will it be active TO be closing the Bayview extension in the past couple of summers? And what would the impact be of having it or not having it?
Well, we look at that every year, and we're looking at that right now, actually, for this year, because as you know, there's a lot of construction down on Lakeshore East. So we're determining when we think it would be best to do the Lakeshore closures. So that's something that we'll come back to you and ask, Councillor, like we do every year, and with the other councillors in the area, about what people think would be best. And what are the best times to do that? If it becomes necessary to not do Bayview because of construction impacts, we would want to take that into consideration and again have that conversation with you and the community as well.
So you'll have that conversation as part of the construction and traffic mitigation planning as to the impact of having it, and you'll tell us what it's going to be.
Yeah, and this year, as you know, many of the events that have gone on historically in the city are back. In the last 2 years, there were none of these events. So there's a fair amount of competition, and we just want to make sure that people both have the opportunity to enjoy the events, including active TO, and also take that into consideration of what are the other impacts on the network.
I think people are asking for your recommendation based on what you've got here for traffic and what that would mean for all of what we've heard here tonight. So that's an undertaking, if you don't mind, for the 2023.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, we're still working on active TO. I don't
mean for this
22.
year. I mean when all this is going
on.
Yeah.
It will. That will be. We'll have to. I'm not being clear. We're going to factor it into our planning for next year, which will happen in the beginning of the year. We look at how all this is playing out.
And Derek or Barbara, anybody, can 311 be used? Can there be a category put on 311 for calls that are related to construction and concerns that can be picked up for your hub?
I don't see why not. I don't know that we've done that yet, but I think we can certainly take that back and explore it for sure.
I think that's a great idea.
I think, Councillor, one of the other, sorry if I could jump in here, one of the other things that Metrolinx has confirmed through their discussions with ourselves, with transportation services, is that they are setting up a hotline that will allow people to communicate with them directly, so that if there are complaints, there will be somebody that will be receiving that complaint and will be addressing that complaint.
I guess, Derek, I don't want to interrupt you, but sure. In all of our dealings with Metrolinx, and people keep saying, why aren't they here? We've asked them so many times for so many things. And I don't think that, I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody, but a number of people feel they're not that responsive. So having a stream that we know is going to Metrolinx in at least, or going to the hub, going to whatever, not our job to fix it, but it's our job to collect it because of the magnitude of this project. And if I had a poll question that said, do you trust Metrolinx? I think that the answer might be not a lot. And so that's one of the reasons why, in getting, again, I'll say, Jennifer's asked one point of contact for a quick response. That's going to be the Metrolinx people. But when things come in 311, like the Rebel nightclub, noise, then that becomes a pattern. If 311 picks up patterns compared to just phoning Metrolinx, et cetera, et cetera. And this, I think, is a really good idea. There's lots of great ideas on here. Some things Metrolinx has to do, some things that the city can say, we'll try to do this in order to mitigate the impacts of this big project. And you really can see just how big of a project is. We didn't look at the parks yet. We can have another one of those. I've had people say, what about at Pape Station? What about at Gerrard and Carlaw? We do not have any information about that. We have not had any requests for the traffic plan for those sites yet. Is that correct? Can I ask you, Barbara, if those are in or not? Do we have that?
Sorry, I don't believe they are. I'll ask Navi to confirm that because I think it's just the early works.
So all the city really has had are these.
That is correct, Barbara.
This information. Early works doesn't cover that far north, right?
Correct. So you
That
have,
is correct.
you now have what we have.
And can I just ask about what's going to happen with Wheel-Trans? There's two large senior buildings right along the tracks, 444 Logan, 369 Pape. What is the plan, or has that been raised yet with anybody?
I'll comment on that because I'm always in direct conversations with TTC. The requirement will that will have to be maintained. It may be moved forwards or backwards, but it will always be maintained and be as close as accessible to whoever needs it. It will be there. We'll have that
So-
requirement in the permit.
It'll be required. And then
Yeah.
I've had a question, what about the large, will anything happen and start before that traffic plan has been submitted and all the comments have been made? And what's the process? Metrolinx is a plan. Can you just describe step by step what happens around the traffic planning from Metrolinx? They've given you these requests. Is this part of their larger traffic mitigation plan, or do they have to submit something else to you? Or are they continuing to refine it and you're continuing to give them feedback?
That's on a daily basis. They send us information. We look at it, review it, we tweak it, we go back and forth. It's never written in stone as of yet, but we're trying to find the best situation for what's going to happen.
And would you expect Metrolinx to take this out to the community? Is that something that you can ask them to do? They're not required to.
We can, Councillor, this is Derek. We can definitely ask them to bring this out to the community so that they're communicating what the traffic management plans will be.
Thank you very much. Well,
Councillor, can I go back to one of your questions before
please.
about
Absolutely.
you were talking about 311. We can use 311. We can have signages at all the entrances with like a 24-hour hotline, and we can also have it on the website that they're required to monitor that website. And basically, if someone emails it in, it goes to whoever the superintendents are on site that they're required to answer it like ASAP. So whoever's on staff at that night, they will get those emails. We can have them set up a website like that. We do the same thing on staging developments, which you know about. We're starting getting all the staging developments to set up websites, so everybody's informed. They can be on master emailing lists. They don't have to check. They can get sent the updates too also.
Well, thank you very much for that. And that's good to know. The experience earlier with Metrolinx was they were to have permits for doing roadworks or doing their boreholes, and they were to alert the community with flyers, and none of that ever happened. So I think you need to know that none of that happened, and that's why people want to make sure that everything's nailed down, because this is going to be a very difficult project. Unnecessary if it was to be underground. Unnecessary at Carlon, Gerrard, and No Frills, unnecessary for all these road closures, because that tunnel boring machine would just do what it was going to do when we had the relief line. And that is just a simple fact of life. I'm going to close us off now. We still have, there's questions, suggestions, lots of big support for making one way in the morning and one way, or turning one ways so there's no competing traffic. And give us the Cadillac model, if you can put it like that, or the deluxe model of traffic mitigation. We're looking forward. Thank you very much for your advocacy on behalf of the community with Metrolinx, both to our planning staff, our transportation staff, and our Parks, Forestry, Recreation staff. And Derek, I think you got to meet a lot of people here tonight. You've been reading the questions. You can see that we really are on top of this and want to make sure we mitigate as much of this as possible. So I do want to thank everybody who has come on this call tonight and everybody who has put their questions in. We will send out both of the decks. Send out, if you want to ask more questions, always can ask questions in Metrolinx, because now you have this information, you'll have the decks. I think that probably Peter MPP Tabbins will ask them to get it together and have a meeting based on this feedback, what the city's fed back to them, and what their commitments are going to be, because this has been difficult all along. We'll still keep trying to get this underground, because we wouldn't have to have this meeting if that was going to happen. It'd be a very, very different meeting. And we wouldn't have all those trees cut down, and we wouldn't have trees going to come down after, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess this is the most difficult project that we've ever faced. And whatever can be done to make it the least harmful and overwhelming and difficult for the community is something that I'm committed to, and I think the city staff are committed to. But again, the province has made this decision. They make these decisions. They can change their mind, but so far they haven't wanted to do that. And so, my friends, this is, thank you very much for being here. 9 o'clock, said you'd be out by 9. Send everything to everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to my great staff, Daryl, Susan, and our meeting host, that's Nick, who always runs such fantastic meetings, and keep make it so you can get all your questions, you can hear all the information, and keeping it as smooth as possible. So with that, I will say good night. I'll see you in the neighborhood. Thank you.